In 1987, the world of gaming would change forever. A small team of developers in Japan, led by a young and ambitious designer named Hideo Kojima, would create a revolutionary stealth action game. A game that dared to challenge what video games could be at the time. And of course, we're talking about Metal Gear. But beneath the surface lie a tale of two versions. The original masterpiece on the MSX2 and the reimagined adaptation for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Two games, but one name. Yet, their differences tell a completely different story of innovation, compromise, and ambition. What was this mysterious Metal Gear? And why did it inspire both awe and controversy at the same time? To understand its impact, we must journey back to the mid-1980s, to a time when gaming was still finding its voice. So sit back, relax, and prepare yourself as we unravel the truth behind Metal Gear. This is the story of Metal Gear, a tale of two platforms. Now our story begins in Japan with the MSX2, a popular home computer of that time. While systems like Famicom and arcade machines dominated the scene, the MSX2 carved out its own niche with advanced capabilities for home computing and gaming. At the time, Konami was a rising star in the gaming world, and they saw potential of this platform and tasked a relatively unknown developer at the time, Hideo Kojima, with creating something new and exciting. Kojima was known for his creativity and ambition, but Metal Gear would be his first major project. His vision for the game was groundbreaking. Instead of the typical action-packed shoot-'em-ups of the time, Kojima wanted to focus on stealth. His idea was simple, yet radical. Kojima thought, what if avoiding enemies was more rewarding than actually fighting them? In Metal Gear, you play as Solid Snake, a rookie operative sent into the heart of the fortified base to destroy a weapon of mass destruction known as Metal Gear. The game's top-down perspective and intricate level design forced players to think carefully about every move. In this game, it wasn't about running and gunning, it was about staying hidden, avoiding detection, and outsmarting your enemies. Kojima's original goal and vision was to push the limits of the MSX2's hardware. The computer's capabilities allowed for detailed environments, multiple enemy types, and even radio communications that added depth to the gameplay. Players weren't just controlling a character, they were engaging in an immersive tactical operation. Every detail from enemy patrols to limited resources was designed to make players feel like a real spy. The MSX2's relatively advanced graphics and sound hardware made Metal Gear's vision possible. Detailed sprites, ambient soundtracks, and even realistic behavior brought Kojima's vision to life, making it one of the most innovative games of the era. Now, while Metal Gear found its success in Japan on the MSX2, Konami saw an opportunity to reach an even larger audience in the West. Enter the Nintendo Entertainment System, the most popular gaming console at the time. In 1988, Metal Gear was adopted for the NES, bringing the title to millions of new players. But this version of the game was a little bit different. The NES, despite its popularity, had hardware limitations compared to the MSX2. These limitations, combined with a rushed development timeline, meant that many aspects of the original game had to be altered. And while the NES version retained the core concept of the stealth gameplay, many changes were made, some minor and others drastic. Localization was another major change. The NES version was heavily marketed in North America and Europe with bold claims of espionage and action. However, the localization process led to several changes in dialogue, story elements, and even level design. For example, some plot details were simplified, and infamous translation errors added unintended humor to the game. Despite these differences though, the NES version was a commercial success, introducing the Metal Gear name to a new audience. The game's marketing emphasized its espionage elements, positioning it in a unique experience in a sea of action-packed platformers and shooters. For many players, and myself included, the NES version was the first encounter with the Metal Gear series. And again, while it might not have been a perfect adaptation, the NES version captured the imagination of gamers around the world. Its success laid the foundation for the series to grow and evolve in the years to come. But how did the NES version differ from Kojima's original vision? To understand the full picture, we need to compare the two versions in detail. So let's break down the key differences between the MSX2 version of Metal Gear and the NES version. First off, we'll take a look at the gameplay mechanics. The MSX2 version emphasized stealth above all else. Players had to navigate carefully, avoiding enemy patrols, and using cover to remain undetected. Alarms were triggered only when players were spotted, forcing them to adapt quickly or retreat. On the NES version, however, stealth took a back seat. Enemies were more numerous, and the game often encouraged direct combat over subtle tactics. This shift made the NES feel less like a spy mission and more like an action game. Next, we'll take a look at the opening sequence. The MSX2 games begin with Solid Snake infiltrating Outer Haven by swimming underwater to a secluded entrance. And in my opinion, this set the tone for the stealth-focused gameplay and added a sense of realism. Now the NES counterpart starts in a forested area with enemies immediately visible. This change replaced the suspenseful infiltration with a more traditional action-packed introduction, undermining the original's atmosphere. As far as level design and map layout, the MSX2's level design was intricate and cohesive. Each area flowed logically with paths, locked doors, and critical items placed strategically to encourage exploration and planning. The NES version's maps were more fragmented and often nonsensical. Players encountered frequent backtracking and obscure item placements that felt more frustrating at times than rewarding. And one of the most confusing things that I found confusing even when I played this game back in the 80s was this change right here. In the MSX2 version, the climax of the game is a direct confrontation with Metal Gear, the walking tank. Players had to disable it strategically, planting explosives while avoiding detection. But for some reason, the NES version, Metal Gear itself is absent from the game completely. Instead, players face a supercomputer as the final boss. And this strips away the climax of the game. The ultimate confrontation is showdown with Metal Gear. And what made it more confusing to me as a kid, even I was kind of confused. I didn't know there were two games, but I was kind of like, the game was, even the US game was building up and it mentioned Metal Gear, but Metal Gear never shows up. I'm like, is it just a computer or, it was kind of confusing at the time, but I had no idea there was two versions of Metal Gear at the time. But that is a major difference. In my opinion, it diminishes the whole stakes of the narrative. Moving on to graphic and sound though, the MSX2's graphics were sharper with more detailed character sprites and environments. The NES visuals, while they were great, don't get me wrong, I thought Metal Gear on the NES was awesome, but they were simplified and lacked the same level of polish. The soundtracks also differed significantly, with the MSX2 featured atmospheric music that enhanced the tension of stealth gameplay, and the NES version's music, though catchy, it looped frequently and lacked some of the same immersive quality. And how could we know at the time? We had nothing to compare it to. And lastly, we'll talk about the story and the dialogue, and this one in my opinion is the most important. Well, I don't know. The fact that there's no Metal Gear, that holds a close second. They're debatable, but we'll talk about the story. The MSX2 offered a richer story with deeper character interactions and a clearer mission objective. In contrast, the NES version suffered from poor localization. Lines like, "I feel asleep," and became infamous for comedic mistranslations. But also by doing this, they weakened the serious tone Kojima intended for the game to have. Key plots were altered or completely removed, leaving the NES gutted and feeling disjointed at times. But again, how could we know? What could we compare it to? Let's talk a little bit about the legacy and impact of the game. Despite its flaws, the NES version of Metal Gear introduced the series to a global audience, laying the groundwork for its legendary status. Meanwhile, the MSX2 version, to American audiences at least, remained a hidden gem and would only be rediscovered years later by dedicated fans. Kojima himself expressed dissatisfaction with the NES adaptation, stating that it did not represent his true vision, and I can't say I blame him. However, he did recognize its role in popularizing the franchise. In later years to follow, remakes and re-releases such as Metal Gear Solid 3 Substance included the MSX2 version, ensuring that the original version of Metal Gear would reach new generations and properly be told like it was intended many years ago. With that said, the legacy of Metal Gear lives on to this day, inspiring countless developers and players. It emphasizes on storytelling, complex game mechanics, and memorable characters set a standard for future games. While the NES version may not have been perfect, it played a crucial role in bringing this groundbreaking series to the whole world. Today, fans can experience the origins of Metal Gear in its truest form, such as the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1. Both the MSX2 and NES versions are accessible to new generation of gamers. These collections preserve the legacy of this iconic series, allowing players to compare and appreciate the brilliance of Kojima's vision and its adaptations. So looking back on Metal Gear for the MSX2 and the NES, they actually represent two sides of a coin. And on one side is a groundbreaking stealth adventure, the other a flawed but influential adaptation. But together they remind us the challenges and triumphs of game development in the 1980s. So whether you played the original game on MSX2 or the NES version like most of us did, one thing is clear. Metal Gear was just the beginning of an epic journey. A journey that will forever change how we play video games. And that's going to conclude our story for today. But let me know in the comments, which version of Metal Gear did you play first? And have you ever experienced the MSX2 version? If you haven't, I highly recommend giving it a shot. Also, please don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe, as it always helps the channel. And that way you don't miss any more gaming news or documentaries. And as always guys, take care of yourself, protect your inner peace, God bless you, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.